All right, hello, I'm Gary Simon, and welcome to this lesson where we're going to focus on layers and how to use them. All right, so let's just go to File, New real quickly, and we're going to specify custom for this real quick. And I'm just going to use something like a 859 by 600, and that'll just fit well within my current resolution. You can use whatever you want. 500 by 500 would work just fine, anything. And leave everything else consistent with these settings and hit OK. All right, so I'm going to hit Control-1, get to 100%, or Command-1 on Mac. And let's go ahead and fill in a background color here with the Paint Bucket tool. And with Layer 1 selected, by default it already is, we'll just left-click once. Okay, so this right here is a layer. There's only one of them, as we can see. So I guess the first question you might have if you're brand new to Photoshop is how do you create a new layer? Well, first let's switch over here to the Move tool instead of the Artboard tool. And the way you can create a new layer, there's several different ways. I'll show you. So we can go click on this little down over here, and it's showing up off the top of my screen so you can't see it, but it's the very first option at the top, and that is called New Layer. Once you click it, it'll have this new layer dialog where you could specify the name if you wish, or you can just let it automatically choose one for you. And some other options down here, you can color code it. You can set the blend mode, which we'll get into later, and the opacity. So usually I'm always just hitting OK. Sometimes I'll name it, sometimes I won't. So we'll hit OK, and now we can see that has this very faint checkered pattern here. That simply means there's nothing in this layer. If we were to fill it in with a color, say for instance, like this dark right here, we'll see it gives us a very small thumbnail preview of what's in there. Okay, so by default right now, these layers, as we could see, we can put anything like in this layer 2, for instance. We could take the rectangle tool, put this in here, and now you can see it automatically changed the name from layer 2 to rectangle 1 based on this tool that we just used. And we can also see a small thumbnail preview once again of what's in there. One thing to note is we can see we have layer 1 down here. It's just a, all it is just a bunch of white pixels. But we also have over here, there's a little icon, and it looks like a square with little tiny squares on each corner. What that is, that's denoting that this is a different type of layer. It's called a shape layer. And this right here, if it doesn't have anything, like this little icon right here, that means it is a rastered layer. So we have raster versus shape layers. What is the difference? All right. Well, the fact that this is a shape layer, it means that we could take this particular shape and we can easily, through anchor points, they're called, if we come over here and choose the direct selection tool, we can click on this and we'll see we have those little squares showing up on the corners. We can move this. We could take one individually and move it around. We can scale it up to any size imaginable, and it does not lose clarity. It's like pretty much pixel perfect. We can make it any size imaginable and scale it up or down, and it remains clear. Now, that is what a shape layer is. It's pretty much very close to vector, which, if you understand what vector is, that's something you use for print. You can make that as large as you want, and there's no loss of quality. Now, if we were to convert this shape layer to a rastered layer, let me back up a few times by holding, let me go forward, Control, Alt, and Z. If we go back here, now if we take this and right click and we choose raster layer, watch what happens. That little icon now goes away. This is now a rastered layer. Now, it's probably a little bit easier if I illustrate this with a different tool, or not a tool, but the shape right here, like a circle. So if I just make a circle here, right click and choose raster layer. Now, if I hit Control T and I scale this sucker up real large, and I choose the Move tool and select Apply, we'll see it is no longer crisp. It has a bunch of fuzziness to it. It looks horrible. Perhaps you've seen pictures like this on social media or whatever. Yeah, this is really bad. You don't ever want to have anything like this, especially in a UI design or your app design. So why would we even use raster layers, you may ask, in the first place if, it has that massive drawback? Well, there are things that you can do with raster layers that you can't do with shape layers. Now, it is our goal as designers and UI designers to try to work what's called non-destructively versus destructively. Now, when we took that shape and we converted it to a rastered layer, that was what you would call destructive. It means we can no longer edit this shape in terms of taking anchor points because no anchor points exist. It's just flat pixels and that's it. But there may be times where you're really trying to pull off a specific effect where you will want to convert it to a rastered layer. Now, more often than not, you're never pretty much very rarely should you run into a situation where you have to absolutely use a rastered layer. A raster layer would be something like a photograph. So yeah, sometimes in your UI designs, you may have photographs. You may have a textured background that's kind of like a very faint sort of opacity. Those are popular. But generally, you want to stick with trying to work non-destructively with shape layers. Okay. Also, we'll get into another thing called blend modes. So up here, we have this drop-down menu, and this provides us with a bunch of different predefined layer blend modes. There's even more that show up off the bottom of my screen, but you can check it out if you click on yours. And by default, they're on normal. Now, what a blend mode is this, and I can illustrate it here. We'll create another ellipse, and this time I'll make it a different color, let's say red. Oops. I'll double click right here to change the color. So these are two normal layers right here. If I change this to darken, we could start to see we saw something behind it now. And if I use my down arrow key with this highlighted in blue, we can filter through all of these different types of blend modes and see how these layers begin to interact with each other. So you have a lot of different options for blend modes that you can use. And then also something that's very powerful is if we double click the right side of the layer, it brings up the layer styles dialog box. Now the layer styles are also very powerful. We can apply certain styles, multiple styles, on a single layer. So if we choose bevel and emboss, we can see it added a sort of bevel. And if we click on it, we can change a ton of different settings. We can make the depth hard, make it the size very large. We can soften it. We can change the angle of the reflection. And basically all of these other layer styles have each of their own properties. So we can give it a stroke if we wish. Increase the size, change the stroke color. We can even give the stroke a gradient color instead of a flat color, and it allows you to adjust the gradient itself. So as you can see, it's quite powerful in terms of the things that you can do with it, with these layer styles. And like I said, you can add multiple layer styles as well. Gradient overlay is very popular. So what I would suggest, simply because this is just an introductory video, is to use your own time to experiment with these. These little plus icons are also relatively new to Photoshop because it allows you to add multiple gradients, multiple color overlays, inner shadows, strokes, and drop shadows. And so these are all things that you can just experiment with at your own. And they're really fun and very powerful as well. So if we leave these here, we can see we have these effects, and we can turn them off if we wish, or individually. And we could also right click and rasterize layer style, and that will bake whatever the pixel data is within the layer itself. And so basically, one more last thing to go over is if I Control Shift and N to create a new layer. That's one way to do it. And we used previous layer to create a clipping mask. A clipping mask we see is pointing down now. What that means is if I take like a brush tool and I start to color outside, we can't see it, but guess what? It only shows up within this layer it's pointing to, and that's it. So that is essentially what a clipping mask is, and we'll definitely be using those. All right, so in the next lesson, we're going to go over important tools and techniques.